Hi folks, welcome to Tuesday's iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast. I think I'm going to change that around and say videocast stroke podcast because more people seem to be watching the videos. Obviously masochists spending half an hour looking at us.
It must
Got to get that practice in somehow, mate.
I don't know. It must be our appearance. Eh?
Aye, well, it's
I
not
wouldn't
me.
have thought that.
Not me. We're going to talk about the presser. As usual, that seems to be the staple. But I think we'll spend the bulk of the program on the power grab, as it's been christened by Westminster. We'll start with the presser, and then we'll have a pop at that. So today's press conference, Stuart, you always take copious notes on this one.
Yes, it was a big day because tomorrow's the big unlocking day from the lockdown, when the pubs open and you can get your hair cut and all the rest of it. So it's a big day for Scotland. Deliberately a Tuesday for the pubs and that, so that there isn't a riot on a Saturday. Is it a Wednesday? Beg your pardon. I'm glad you pointed that out, Jimmy.
Nobody's.
No, you're right. I kept thinking it was Monday for some reason or other. She ran through all the details. She said she really laid it on fairly thick, like heavy, too much butter on your toast. She told us about California shut down again, Melbourne shut down again, and although we're unlocking tomorrow, we have to be very, very careful. And basically, she really laid it on thick. But she also made a couple of very interesting live statements. Which I'm hoping, if we haven't got the clip, Nori, we can still advise people to go and watch it in the recording of today's show, because it was of her show as opposed to our show. But she did make it very clear what was going on. She was asked about people going to pubs in particular, crowding into pubs, and she's saying, well, if people are going to pubs and crowding in like they're used to, well, that's not going to work. And she brought in the heavy artillery. She brought in the chief nursing officer, the chief medical officer, the health secretary, sorry, and the chief nursing officer to tell us how they were preparing for a second wave in the winter, because apparently there's been some headlines in London about that, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. Aye.
Making sure that we were well acquainted with the plans that they're making here in Scotland to deal with that. She used, the First Minister used a term, she says, we're planning ahead for the winter, but what we're looking at now is a possibility of a resurgence, was the word she used. So you can look out for that. She also had a wee go at the Express and one or two of the hyenas later on. And she said, well, I can tell you what will be in the headlines tomorrow, because she said, she literally, I quote her, I don't want to be the wet blanket. So she said, that'll be the headline in the Express. I wouldn't be sure. She immediately said after that, when you go out, keep the heat. So I think that's a much better headline.
That'll be a better one, yeah.
That's a better one. So she had a very good, let's be honest, she had a very good press conference. She made it very clear what she was doing. And I was impressed. And I'm not always her biggest fan these days, but I was impressed.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I'd agree with Stuart. She had a good day. Fortuitous that the chief medical officer in England had been talking about a second wave in the winter, because it gave her the option to then go, no, what we're looking at here is a resurgence, not a second wave. We're looking at things coming back at the moment. This point out all the planning for the winter is very much in place. Everything that they've put in place for this first wave will still be in place in Scotland come the winter. And also to point out, which I don't think the press would be necessarily impressed on, and they probably wouldn't pick up on it, but certainly we should, that the figure that London were talking about for next winter was a reasonable worst case scenario of 120,000 deaths. Now, this is the same chief medical officer for England that said a reasonable worst case scenario was 20,000 deaths, and we're up at around 60,000 now in England. Well, we will be when they actually report all their figures. So if I was English and hearing reasonable worst case scenario at 120,000, I'd be shitting myself. Because they never got anywhere near the worst case scenario first time around. So what's to suggest that they're going to manage that second time?
Well, the worst case scenario the first time was 500,000, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was figures that suddenly became into the public domain through Boris Johnson much later in the day, because they knew that the reasonable worst case scenario, 20,000, they were going to get nowhere near. He went from 20,000 to 100,000 to 500,000 in one press conference, Norrie.
I mean, that is a worry. I did enjoy the presser. I did enjoy our pop at the Express and the Telegraph, who said the question was phrased in such a way as to get a headline.
Oh,
what did he ask her? Was it inevitable that the border would be closed due to the figures being so different in England?
she showed today. She really showed her skill, her mastery of a press conference. She should do training once she retires.
And she turned around and said, I can see the headline you want me to write for you. Sturgeon says border closure is inevitable.
Perhaps after getting daily press conferences for months and months, you should call an independence referendum, because you can certainly deal with them now.
Actually, I was thinking this yesterday after we broadcast yesterday, that sod the debates. Forget the debates. Let's just have daily press conferences with the union as press and let her shred them.
Oh, please put Jackson Carlo next to her for a daily press conference. So that'd be entertaining in the extreme.
I said a few days ago, last week sometime, that essentially what you need to do is you look at what Jackson Carlo's saying, and then a week later, the British government will totally make a fool of him. Face masks. Why does it have to be mandatory? Chips up Carlo, and a week later, Boris Johnson makes them mandatory in shops.
They've kind of done it consistently, mate. He's kind of been unionism's rodeo clown for quite some time now. Kind of boy that they chuck into the bull ring wearing the clown mask so that the bull can chase him. I'm
struggling to think of a situation where he hasn't put his foot in it. Boris Johnson's government has put his foot in it for him. I mean, do they not communicate on any level at all?
I would imagine, to be honest, they just take a look at the poll figures in Scotland and they didn't care, mate. It doesn't matter if they get Scots votes. They're in power in England for the next 4.5 years. And what is, judging by what's the U-turn, yet another spectacular U-turn they've made today around Huawei. After all, it was only January that they came up with the original decision on Huawei. So for a strong government, they're remarkably weak.
The Huawei thing is not a U-turn by the Tory government. I'm sorry, that's the wrong way to interpret that. That's the US government forcing the UK government's hand.
The US government didn't, mate. It's the US lobbying system forcing the UK government's hand. They bought another 10 backbenchers that they didn't have in January.
Well,
change the decision.
And what about this warship that's going to be based in the Far East to threaten China?
Aye.
I tell you, we're laughing at this. Well, Britain's going to threaten China. Aye, right.
Well, I'm sorry. What the US government has done is said they are going to destroy Huawei. So they're not going to be able to do maintenance on anything they put in anyway. They're not letting them use chips that have any American technology in them.
That's fine. The Chinese didn't want to use American chips. They were forced to do it to get into the American market. Huawei can make their chips, well, at the moment, their phones are miles better than Apple, so I'm imagining that will make the chips better. And this pulling all the stuff, the hardware, out of the UK market, it only harms Britain. It only harms us because we've got about almost half of the hardware for 4G that's in the ground in Britain is made by Huawei. It may be installed by other companies. They may call themselves McNicholas. They may call themselves something else.
I opened some old tech up the other day before I destroyed it. Years old. And there was Huawei on the processors and things. I was amazed. I had no idea that they
Well,
were around for so long.
I'm sorry that this is America. This is us, the 51st state.
But there's no an American alternative. We
No,
can't
there
build
isn't. That's
we
the
can't build a
other
5G
amazing
network.
thing about it. It's not just cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face and kicking yourself up the arse.
Kicking yourself in the balls at the same time as kicking yourself in the arse, mate. It might be difficult, but we've managed it.
It's incredible. I mean, there's only 2 companies with the tech that gets near it, and they're way behind apparently. One's Swedish, one's Norwegian.
Sony Ericsson are about 2 years behind Huawei, they reckon, in terms of building 5G networks. And certainly they're no big enough to build a 5G network for Britain or America at the moment.
And Nokia is the other company, which basically went down the tubes 3 years ago.
Aye, who's the money behind Nokia? Because they were basically right down the gurgler, weren't they?
Well, don't be surprised if it's Chinese money.
Well, there you go.
That would be good for a laugh.
Aye, hey, we'll get a cut of that if it is, mate. We'll have siphoned it through one of our myriad offshore accounts. The UK will get, well, we'll not get a cut of it, but the UK government.
It's surprising. It's an aside, this, but I discovered yesterday that the company that owns the Guardian newspaper has shares in a company called Faculty, which is run by Dominic Cummings' mates. And they've been awarded contracts without tendering. So it leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I would rather the Guardian got some of the profit than it all went to the Tory party treasurer.
Well, there's a reasonable way to put it.
To be frank with you.
Not my first idea, but I'll let you off with that.
Aye. Right, let's move on to the power grab. For those of you that aren't up to speed on this, the Westminster government has, since basically the Brexit referendum, stated that powers coming back, once the referendum was over, they stated powers coming back from Europe that would normally have gone to the devolved administrations would be going to Westminster for the foreseeable. But nobody had to worry about it because you would still get more powers to the devolved administrations. At the time, Stuart, you and I certainly discussed this on our other broadcast, our other podcast. And we decided that what would actually happen is they would have to do this in order to have joined up trade deals. Essentially,
that's their excuse.
Well, in a practical sense, they couldn't have 4 different trade deals for the 4 different countries of the UK.
Oh, now you're making the case that David Livingstone made 2 years ago.
In a practical sense, they couldn't, but they lied about how those would be negotiated. What they said was that the devolved governments would be fully involved in the discussions.
Well, look,
turns out that is not what's going to happen.
All right, but no, you're missing out at one very important point. Those powers default to the devolved administrations unless they bring in legislation at Westminster. So this legislation in Westminster, they are actually powers that default to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Well, Stuart, you're missing the historical fact that they've already brought powers in, so they were never going to default. They're now bringing in more powers.
They've legislated to make sure that, yes, that things can't be, they've got no power left.
This construct that they've come up with, this UK internal market that's been dreamt up in Conservative Party central office, has never existed. It's just a figment of some Tory bobag's imagination, and it's some way to say we need control over that market, so we need those powers to exercise that control over that market.
Well, look, we need to headline another fact about this, the planning at the moment, that the plan, this is their plan, would establish a committee composed of unaccountable political appointees chosen by the Prime Minister, who would have the legal right to veto legislation passed by Edinburgh, Cardiff or Belfast. In other words, unaccountable officials would have the right to overturn democratically elected politicians in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now, how did that go down?
Well, I mean, that was never talked about during the Brexit campaign. And as far as I can see, it doesn't simply apply to legislation affecting the devolved powers that will never be devolved.
Aye.
It will affect all legislation.
Yeah.
Aye.
So,
It's almost, well, it is draconian. So it's a measure that you've got to wonder if that's the first, love all, that's our first serve, because that is almost certain to be struck down by any court that is challenged in.
I think you're wrong about that, Jimmy. I think after the Seoul Convention was shown to be totally meaningless,
It wasn't.
it was.
I looked into that. In the Miller case, the Seoul Convention was the secondary part of the case. Therefore, they never fully addressed the Seoul Convention.
Well, as far as the British government's concerned, they can ignore the Seoul
Well, as
Convention.
far as the British government, well, that's the thing. The British government can think that because it's their own rule. So the British government have always had the issue with the Seoul Convention that this is our rule, so we can cheerfully break it. But it was never confirmed by the Supreme Court that what they were doing was in any way acceptable.
Well,
Because it was a secondary consideration in the case, and Gina Miller won her case, so they never went to the secondary consideration.
It's in the name. A convention is only a convention. It's like sat there playing cards at bridge,
Aye.
Well,
like
guys,
convention, you do things, but it's not in the rules.
guys, I have to tell you, it's all irrelevant anyway.
Well, they've got
Because UK ministers, with or without consultation with the Scottish government, can overrule the Scottish government.
Yeah,
That is
power
part of the new suggested legislation.
that's a power that they're taking to themselves. But again, it's one that they won't want tested in court, and obviously will have to be tested in court. You can't have the UK education minister, for example, who has never even looked at Scottish education policy, probably doesn't understand it, and certainly isn't cognizant with Scots law, overruling the Education Secretary of Holyrood. But that's exactly the power they're giving themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And expect to see legislation very soon that will not allow the courts to make decisions on these areas.
Oh, right, absolutely. I like that. I really enjoyed the Wee Ginger Doug's article on it today, which is quite short. The first half is not very important. It talks about George Galloway, and that's another story altogether. I nearly posted a photograph of George Galloway and Nigel Farage with their arms around each other, grinning like Cheshire cats. That's going to go down well, isn't it? He puts it in a lovely way. The entire purpose is to provide. Wait a minute, sorry. The Tories are intelligent enough to realise that simply abolishing Holyrood would generate such a political clamour in Scotland that it would make independence inevitable in short order. So instead, they've resolved to hollow out Holyrood and the devolution settlement from within. So that's what Mike Russell described as boiling the frog. The frog sits there in the cold water, getting boiled up slowly, doesn't jump out.
I'm sorry, I have to say at this point, that's a fallacy. Frogs don't sit there and boil. Don't ask me how I know that.
Tell me you've no boiled a frog just to check it if it would stay in the pot.
Some things need experimentation, Jimmy. No,
Anyway, are you
no frogs died.
Are you trying to tell me you don't understand that, Norrie? Of course you do.
No, I totally understand it. And I'm sorry, Stuart, but you know, and I know, I've been warning about this for 2 years. This, as soon as the Brexit, 4 years, as soon as the Brexit referendum came on board, I said the Tories will use it to basically castrate Holyrood because they've never wanted devolution. Never wanted devolution. And they will turn Scotland and Holyrood into a county council. That's what they will do.
Norrie, you just mentioned, for example, expect legislation where you can't take these things to court. They can't enact legislation where we can't take something to the Court of Session.
Oh no, but
the
Scottish courts will become meaningless within this as well. We're going to lose a lot more than just Holyrood powers here.
So if the Scottish courts become meaningless, effectively they are finishing off what Derry Irvine and Tony Blair started by setting
They are
by
doing
putting
what
an
they've
English court above the Scottish court.
they're doing what they've done in the past, and everybody has conveniently just ignored. And they are saying that English courts are superior to Scottish courts, and they'll
That's
do it
fine.
again.
That's the union finished. We walk
The,
away at
the
that point. We have
Supreme,
a parliament that can turn around and say, "Came what? You broke the Act of Union, ram it."
Well, look, the key point, I think, is, I'll come back to boiling the frog, because the point is, at some point, are we going to face an uprising from the people in Scotland? Or is it
No.
going to be a frog just boiled slowly to death?
no, we are not going to face an uprising. You're not getting your barricades, Stuart. It's not going to happen.
Right, there's a consequence that follows that, and that is the First Minister's delaying of any movement towards independence. The longer that gets delayed, the more dangerous it is for Scotland's position.
If you believe that,
I'm sorry, you'll need to be a bit more specific, Stuart. Scotland's position is what? As a region of England?
Yeah, well, any powers to hold a referendum, or even just to have a debate in Holyrood, could disappear.
And don't be surprised at that one either.
I mean, it's yeah. Don't be surprised if there isn't a move to make it illegal in Scotland to hold a referendum, or even to debate it in your parish council chamber at Holyrood.
Yeah, and at the moment there is basically a three-pronged attack. There is a crowd of lords who are trying to write legislation that will effectively make a referendum
Another one, yeah.
illegal. Right, that's one aspect that has gone off the board for the moment, but that's still ongoing.
aye, because the legal position on making referenda illegal is probably beyond the ken of most of the people that are actually in the House of Lords.
Well, they don't have to make it illegal. They just have to make it a UK-wide referendum or a 63% in favour vote, whatever. They'll find a way to do this that looks legal and looks reasonable and makes it impossible.
And Norrie, I think you're
I've got
implying,
one that I've stated. The next one is using Brexit as an excuse to hollow out the powers of Holyrood. That's already happening and has indeed happened.
You're giving the UK Parliament and the people that operate within it superpowers as if
They've got superpowers.
Norrie, they're incompetent.
Doesn't matter.
They didn't realise when they enacted the Emergency Powers Act what powers they were passing on to Holyrood and Cardiff and Northern Ireland. That's how competent these people are. They had to be sat down round a table, and senior civil servants had to explain to them, look, you can't do this. You've just handed the emergency powers to Scotland to do this.
Jimmy, the point about this is nothing to do with competence. They're a complete bunch of arseholes, but they are powerful, and they have the power to override all the rights in Scotland.
So you're giving them that. I say they don't.
Well,
I say they don't.
Okay, how are you going to stop them?
They don't have a written constitution. So they can't turn around and say it's constitutional law that you must do this and you must obey that. The UK Parliament has the sovereignty of the Crown, but Scotland still has the sovereignty of the people. They've never, in the 300 years of the Union, came to a sensible position on how those two things rest together. So is our sovereignty, is that just to be wished away because the English now dismiss it?
Jimmy, we're 10% of the population.
Doesn't matter about percentages. We're 100% of the population of Scotland.
Wait a minute. If the Westminster government choose to pass laws that castrate Scotland, they can do it.
Or you, if it comes to that, Norrie.
Well, Norrie, so you would accept it. You would think.
No, I wouldn't. No. My argument isn't about having an argument. My argument is about if they get themselves into the right position, the futility of it, because all that leaves us is UDI.
Well, yeah, okay. That was more or less the question I was about to ask. What do we do then? If you've made the point, Norrie, you made it. Actually, we obviously clearly agree with each other that there's not a lot we can actually do anymore politically. So or as Jimmy's pointed out, even in the courts. So what are we left with?
UDI.
Well, shut down the UK Parliament.
We've got
every single one of these laws argue every line.
Yeah.
Well, they've
Yeah,
certainly,
and the SNP will do that. And Jacob Rees-Mogg will give them 15 minutes to do it.
And at the same time, I would move towards UDI anyway, mate. I didn't have an issue. If they are going to attempt to neuter Holyrood, why would you show them any consideration whatsoever into what we do next?
The only, well, okay.
They're not going to send troops up here, mate, and they've not got enough police to come up here and deal with Scotland if Scotland rises. And if they tell us that our parliament is shut, if Scotland rises.
They're not going to pass a law that says everybody in Scotland is now a peasant or a second-class citizen or not equal to the English. They're going to boil the frog. They will do it slowly, drip, 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 and they will make it look, or the unionist press will make it look like reasonable things to do.
Well, you forgive me, mate, but they can't make it look like reasonable things to do. They can't have a devolution settlement that's been set in stone for 20 years and then just rip it apart because it doesn't suit Boris or it doesn't suit Dominic. In fact, Dominic's not even bothered about the devolution settlement. He's just bothered about getting on with ripping the heart out of England and as much profit as he possibly can out of that in the next few years. He just needs us to be quiet while he's doing it.
Jimmy, what do you mean they can't do it? They've already done it.
Where?
Well, they've done it with Brexit. We voted against
Brexit. They've not even managed to bloody get Brexit over the door yet, mate.
Aye, but it will be over the door come January the 1st.
It's taken the greatest minds in the English Parliament 20 years to try and get to Brexit to a stage where it's an absolute bourach. And you're telling me that they're going to tie the legal minds and the intelligence of Scotland in knots in the next 6 months?
Jimmy, you
seem UK internal market.
Jimmy, you seem to misunderstand what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is they will pass laws to make it impossible. It won't matter if we win the argument. They will pass laws to make it impossible.
Okay,
but those laws need to be tested.
No, look, I'm more with Jimmy on this. I mean, there is a strong possibility that what they're creating is chaos, whether it's deliberate or by accident. Even if it's not deliberate, as far as the Cummings and gang are concerned, it won't matter. Now the problem is, did I not see something today? Something about the Labour Party in London deciding they're not going to contest some kind of move towards that. Well, they're not going to ask for an extension they're not going to support asking for an extension from Europe now.
It's too late.
There's a strong part of the left, even now, that actually still wants chaos, not just the right. It's only in the middle it's like I read a long article by Mike Small this morning, which it all added up to the left still looking quite happy to have chaos. They're not going to make any progress unless there's chaos. It was like, God, has Mike Small's been reading Mao Zedong again or Confucius?
Just to be completely off the board there, Norrie, these laws that they're going to pass, why should we accept them?
Jimmy,
we have ideologues promoted over people of talent, and we have a civil service that they're openly trying to politicise, and we've just to accept that because the English have voted for it.
Jimmy, I'm not actually asking you to accept anything. What I'm pointing out is that they are in a position to make it illegal for you not to. Now, whether that persuades
that people do,
whether that persuades 50% of the population to take to the streets,
they don't need to take to the streets, mate.
We've
got a government that, if in the process of being neutered, rolls over and says, yes, please can I have some more, then we'd have to replace them. But do you really think that the Scottish government is just going to sit idly by and watch Holyrood be torn apart purely because of a constitutional settlement that they don't accept?
Well, look,
I don't see what. Okay, let me ask the question: what would you see as the way to fight this when you're neutered in the courts?
With the courts, for example, the Court of Session is the highest court in Scotland, and the Court of Session is entitled to strike down any law that pertains to Scotland. You go to the Court of Session and say, this is undemocratic, strike it down.
No, the
And then
highest
at that
court,
point,
the highest court in Scotland is now the Supreme Court of the UK.
the Court of Session is the highest court in Scotland, mate.
No, it's not.
The AXA Union specifically forbade any other court being set above it.
That has not yet been tested. I don't think it's been tested yet. There is who's making it? Some guy called, oh God, no.
I'm sorry.
There is a court case underway to challenge.
If you lose in the Court of Session, if you lose in the Court of Session, you go UK Supreme Court, then you go to Europe. That's the path.
But you do. Yeah, but the UK. That's what I was talking about earlier. Derry Irvine and Tony Blair's handcuffs that they put on Scotland before they allowed us to have our own parliament was to create the UK Supreme Court. But the reality of that UK Supreme Court has not yet fully exerted its supremacy over the Court of Session. And the moment that it does that, that specifically and automatically means the end of the ACTA Union. It's written into the ACTA Union. It's certainly the Act of Union between Scotland and England that was passed in Edinburgh.
Jimmy,
no court can be set above it.
Jimmy, you could be right. Norrie could be right. Norrie's saying that the likely outcome would be UDI. You're saying, Jimmy, that there's still a possibility of going to court. There is a third option, which is also likely, which is what's called civil disobedience. You know, perhaps not paying your taxes.
Doesn't it happen in modern times in Scotland or England, mate? When's the last time you seen civil disobedience? The poll tax riots. That was one day.
And that was specific to the poll tax.
Aye, and it was one day a riot, and the UK press absolutely shit themselves up.
Well, no, I'm not talking about on the streets, but it could be, you know, they could do it financially. But then again, of course, there is the possibility of blocking streets. There is the possibility of driving your tractors up and blocking.
Aye. I would argue that there's a possibility if the Scottish government doesn't fight this, I would think that the Scottish people would. But I think we'd be far smarter than doing it with civil disobedience. I think we'd just shut down their banks. I think we'd shut down the operation of the internet. I think we'd shut down electric companies. I think there's plenty of ways to do it.
I think you should surround Faz Lane with a bunch of old lorries and abandon them.
It'd be a change for surrounding them with a bunch of old crusties and abandoning them.
So the staff kind of get in and out, you know. Just
you two guys better find something that's fairly easy to do that 50% of the population would be prepared to do.
Well, that hasn't been tested yet. Until we do that, we won't know, will we?
Well, that's what I'm saying to you. Find something, because I'm sorry, I cannot see a large enough percentage of the Scottish population being prepared to disrupt the economy sufficiently to piss Westminster off. I don't see it as a practical at all.
As I say, mate, I think you're imbuing these people with superpowers. They've made an absolute cluster burek of Brexit, and they've still not managed to get that over the line. If you think they're coming up with a UK Parliamentary Act that is going to set aside 20 years of devolution in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland that's going to be effective, I don't know who they're going to get to write it for them, because
Jimmy,
whoever they're going to write it for them isn't part of their government at the moment.
Jimmy, I don't understand why you think they're not just going to do worse, because they've already done it.
No, the fact
they've already done it.
They've already done what?
They've already kept powers to themselves that are ours.
Yes, they've taken powers to themselves, but they've not used them because they've not got the balls to use them, because they know they'll have to be tested in court. They can't just tell us they're going to do this and do it and not have it tested.
They're going to do it tomorrow. They're passing the legislation tomorrow.
What legislation are they passing tomorrow?
They're effectively going to be able to overwrite laws introduced by the Scottish government that do not fit into their fantasy one market UK. Well, they've done it. It's legal. Take it to court if you want.
I'm happy to take it to court, mate, and then the law's struck down. What happens if the law is struck down?
The law is in place.
It doesn't matter if it's in place or not. A judge can still strike a law down. A court can still say that is illegal. You cannot take that power to yourself.
Well, they've done it.
Well, they haven't finished doing that yet.
Well, they've already halfway there, Stuart.
Yeah, but they
Again,
haven't
Westminster is
completed
not
that yet.
sovereign.
That is
The
part of their
Queen's
plan.
sovereign.
They've got the Henry VIII's in place.
Oh,
And
that's
Henry
That
VIII
was
laws
that was challenged in court and won.
And what was
The Henry VIII powers.
the Henry VIII
when they
powers
used
have not been challenged in the Scottish courts, mate.
prorogation was a Henry VIII power.
Scottish courts do not control Westminster.
And Henry VIII laws don't apply to Scotland because they were written in the fucking 1500s when Scotland was an independent nation.
Well, they're being applied, whether they apply or not, they are being applied.
And they will be tested by the Scottish courts and struck down.
Who's taking them to court over it? Because they're being applied now, Jimmy.
Well, if they're not being applied now because they've not passed them yet. They were
passed a year and a half ago.
Norrie, the Henry VIII stuff can't apply to Scotland. We were an independent country if Westminster wants to take them powers to itself, wonderful. Those are powers of the English Crown. The English Crown is limited in what it can do in Scotland by the Act of Union.
Are you referring back, Jimmy? Are you referring back to the court case that Joanna Cherry won at the Court of Session, where the prorogation was struck down? Was that because it was a Henry VIII power, because it couldn't apply to Scotland?
No, the prorogation was struck down on some weird, obscure thing, mate, that Gina Miller won her case on.
It was struck down, and wasn't the prorogation initially struck down in the Court of Session?
And then it had to be taken to the Supreme Court.
Aye, but they didn't. And again, the Supreme Court using its workaround, because they have the workaround that they hear things in Scottish law. But again, they've never ever taken it to the nth degree where they have to test. For example, does Westminster sovereignty, i.e. the sovereignty of the English Crown and the United Crowns, does that outweigh and overrule the sovereignty of the people of Scotland? It's never been fully tested.
Well, it does in the sense that the Act of Union has been broken on numerous occasions.
Well, that's where we come back to.
Generally by mutual agreement, to be quite honest.
But that's where we come back to UDI, or as Peter Bell prefers to call it, dissolve the Union.
Aye, and it's also where you come back to the thing, why did the SNP have the UK Parliament reaffirm the claim of right last year? There clearly has to be a constitutional reason why they done that, and why that effectively went through on the nod, and English MPs were told, stay well away from that, do not vote in this vote.
Effectively, it was a flag waving exercise. It's meaningless because English MPs believe in the power of Parliament in the Crown. And quite right. That's what the law of their land is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, ever since strangely enough, given that we're still in July, ever since King William, ever since William of Orange came in and took over England initially, the deal he signed to become king was that Parliament would be sovereign forever.
Yeah, well,
yeah, but there's various ways.
But that's
because it's not in Constitution. Can his heirs be held to the deal
essentially, that's the Constitution they still work from, though.
Well, the other point I would bring up, Jimmy, your idea that this bunch of hooligans that are at Westminster at the moment aren't capable of doing everything I've suggested they're capable of doing is mad, because they have no morals here.
Well, of course they've got no morals, mate, but I'm saying you're imbuing them with a superpower to pass legislation that is absolutely going to eviscerate 20 years of law and legislation that sits at Holyrood, and I don't think they've got the technical capability to do it.
Well, I think they're more capable than anybody we've seen, because they don't care about consequences. They are so full of their own self that they believe they'll get away with anything.
That's fine, but the consequence will be that Scotland will find that unacceptable. I can't lay out to you right now the ways in which we will find that unacceptable and the actions that we will take. But if they enact this internal market of the UK pish that tells us our Parliament is toothless, meaningless, and whoever we vote for, we will just be instructed for the rest of our days by English Tories. I'm telling you, Scotland will not accept that.
Well,
I'd agree with you, Jimmy. I think that is.
well, you'll find out on Thursday.
I think you're
No,
not
you'll
sure
know.
about that.
Thursday's just another step along the path, mate.
Well, you'll find out on Thursday if they think that's what they can do, because they will pass this. And we're not, as I said earlier, we're not just talking about a group of self-appointed whatevers, Tory placemen, telling Holyrood what laws they can and can't enact. We're talking about individual ministers having the power to tell Holyrood what it can and can't do.
And do you seriously think the Scottish Parliament, if Chris Grayling comes up and says to them, by the way, you can't do that because I say you can't, do you think they're going to take a blind bit of notice?
Mike Russell's been screaming and shouting about it for a year and a half now.
Well, can I just take this argument one stage further? If it gets as bad as that, as Norrie says it is, and if Jimmy is prepared to accept that it could get there, what actions could we possibly take? Can we think back in history? Look, think of the suffragettes. That
I'm not showing myself in front of the King's horse at the Derby.
That was the biggest headline. They really gave the existing Parliament in Westminster a really hard time for 20 years. Came up with with novel ways. That's just one example. You want to go to an extreme, obviously you've got the dirty protest, but nobody's.
I don't think the mindset in Scotland. We would actually have to have tanks really, rolling over the border.
Do you really think that the French can shut things down with tractors? The Belgians can shut things down with tractors, but the Scots can't.
Sorry, our farmers vote what?
Yeah, all right, then lorries.
Our hauliers vote for who?
They didn't vote Tory, mate. They can't all vote Tory, or the Tories would be in power in Scotland.
The vast majority of guys who own these businesses I'm talking about are
right. So you're basically taking every Tory voter in the country to your argument at that point then.
Well, what I'm saying is, I mean...
Not every farmer votes
Tory, I'm buying a tractor tomorrow just in case.
Well, what I'm saying, I mean, I've seen it in Catalonia when they shut down Barcelona. And you don't actually need an awful lot of farm machinery to shut down a motorway.
Well, there you go.
No.
But I can't see it happening here. I'm sorry.
Why are we special? I mean, are you suggesting Scots are exceptionally,
Historically, Stuart, we've never had a revolution.
Norrie, see when we've got support for yes at 55% and support for the 54% support for the SNP at 55%. Do you really think that the majority of people are just going to say, okay, the English have got us beat now. We'll just have to pucker up and make the best of it?
I'll tell you what I think they'll do. I think they'll take as much power as they can with a view to giving some of it back. I think they'll take as much as they can, have the argument, and drip feed power back into Holyrood to allow us to think we're winning.
And you think people like Mike Russell and Joanna Cherry and Nicola Sturgeon,
Mike Russell, Joanna Cherry, but they're aware of what's happening now.
Well, clearly they're aware of it.
What difference is it making to the Scottish people? Makes a difference to us because we're up to speed, because we see what's happening. The vast majority of people who read the Daily Record, the Sun, the Express know nothing about it.
Well, they believe everything's fine and everybody loves Boris. So
your first job, Jimmy, is to get everybody informed. And I have to say, you're doing a fantastic job at the moment.
I don't think they need to be informed particularly, mate. As you say, if they're taking these powers to themselves on Thursday, then it'll show itself.
Well,
it'll show itself in their actions. They'll turn around and say, by the way, your Parliament's shutting.
Well, that's a very... I'm
we're
sorry.
not going to go that far. So what we're going to do is, your SNP, when you win your election next year, you're going to have to send us your manifesto doing. We'll take a red pen out and mark out the bits that you're not allowed to do. Well, no, and mark in green the bits that you're allowed to do.
Well, Jimmy, you're making a valid point there, a general point, which is, look at the behaviour of the Tories at the moment. They're crowing. they're crowing every single day in every way they can on social media. They're not hiding anything.
They're not going to take a red pen through anybody's manifesto. They're simply going to say, sorry, you can't enact that. And under our new legislation, you cannot enact that law.
Right. So, and that's not going to be a massive part of next year's Scottish election campaign when the SNP publish a manifesto and the Tories run a campaign against them saying, your manifesto's lies because we're not going to allow you to do that.
The first time you'll see it.
Wait a minute. Before we get to that election, I would imagine there's going to be some weakening of the powers of Holyrood well before we go to that election, and it could well end up being what the election's all about.
The first time you'll see it is the trade deal with America, and you won't see the trade deal with America because you won't be allowed to. Right at the moment, what the Americans want is that trade deal to be under wraps for 5 years. It's not going to be published, so you're not even going to know it's happening when you lose your right to decide your food standards.
So that wouldn't be the first time. That'll be the first time that we didn't see it, rather than the first time we see it.
That's the first time it will be discussed on the front pages of newspapers.
I don't think they'll even get close to a trade deal with America, mate. How are they going to do a trade deal before November?
All right, so Nori, you're not even going to consider what I've just suggested. You're just going to ignore me there, sat there on your high horse.
Yeah, I'm just going to ignore you, Stuart.
You don't accept that next year's Holyrood election could be all about the taking away of the powers, the devolution.
No, I don't.
Issues.
I don't, because
how can it not be?
It won't look like that. Well, there's two reasons it won't happen. One is the Tories will fight the election on what they always fight, and they won't engage with the argument. They will fight the election on no second independence referendum because they can't fight it on anything else. Well, they can't even fight it on coronavirus.
Yes, but if all three other parties, even I mean, there's some word around this week that even the British parties, Labour and the Lib Dems, are interested in defending devolution.
They are, but they will fight it against the SNP, as they always do. They're not going to change their spots.
We're looking at a very different run into the election, not just in May. We've got months before an election.
Well, the Labour Party are going to fight a Holyrood election by attacking the Tories.
If they think their treasure of devolved Parliament in Scotland is removed. Yeah.
This is the Labour Party. This is the same Labour Party who cut half of the Smith agreements points out, who were allowing less powers coming to Holyrood than anybody else, including the Tories. That Labour Party.
So the Labour Party in Scotland will split down the middle if they do that.
No, the Labour Party in Scotland will fight the SNP, as always. They won't fight the Tories. In Scotland, they fight the SNP.
I'm suggesting they will, and on a different. Don't forget, the pitch will be different. It's like a different game. If the powers are being removed, then it's a different game.
Right. Okay. So you're going to side with the party that's in power, whose seats you need to win to get into power. No, Stuart, no, this is politics. They'll fight the SNP, as will the Lib Dems. The only ones that won't will be the Greens. The Tories will fight it, as usual, on no second independence referendum.
So the Labour Party and the Lib Dems are going to fight on a manifesto to emasculate Holyrood.
No, the Lib Dems are going to fight on a manifesto to make mental health the most important thing since green cheese.
Okay.
The Labour Party will fight, as usual, on their airy-fairy jobs, and they'll offer free bus travel.
You're stuck down a blind alley there if you really believe they're not going to do that.
Okay, Stuart, I'll bet you £200,000 now.
Oh, you can have my £200,000 now. I haven't got any.
Why would the Labour Party fight the Tories on devolution when the SNP will be fighting the Tories on devolution?
It's plain.
The Labour Party will have to take a position at that point. Are you arguing that they're going to take the Tory position?
No, the Labour Party have already taken a position which is supporting devolution, but they won't fight the Holyrood election on that.
And if it becomes the biggest part of that campaign, they'll have to.
They won't fight the Holyrood election on that. They will fight the SNP.
No, you've got. I'm with Jimmy in that. If powers are removed and it becomes an issue, Labour will have to take a position on it.
Stuart, it's okay. I'm quite comfortable being right when you two are wrong.
He's a smug bastard, doesn't he?
Well, it's nothing to do with being smug, Stuart. Just think of the practicality. How do you fight a campaign when you agree with the party in power? How do you fight that? How do you say we're better than you?
Nori, we're talking about different ground we're sitting on. It's the ground we're sitting on now and the ground we're sitting on next spring will be very different if, as you believe, the powers disappear this week.
No, it won't. No, it won't.
Because, well, that's your opinion. I don't agree.
Because nobody will know about it.
Well, there's another issue altogether. Let's go on the media next.
Can you possibly think they're going to remove powers from Holyrood and the Holyrood administration don't know about it? And are they going to make it the central plank of the campaign next year?
The SNP will. But nobody else will.
If it's the central plank, everybody else is fighting around that at the same time. Labour can't be sitting there saying, by the way, you guys have your massive constitutional debate, but we want to talk about Scottish schools. And we want to talk about a jobs guarantee.
That's what
if they do that, mate. Well, if they do that, it's a two-horse race, and the SNP will win 65%, 30% to the Tories, and nobody else will get votes.
I agree with you, but why would the Labour Party fight the Tories at a Holyrood election?
You're still blind to the. You'd still think they're playing the same game.
They've fought them at every Holyrood election bar the last one.
No, they haven't. They've always fought the SNP, Jimmy.
Right, so you're telling me that when Labour and the Liberal Democrats won, when Labour won the elections to Parliament in 1999 and 2003 and 7.
I'm not talking about how you fight it when you're in power, because the SNP learnt that lesson. You fight Westminster when you're in power. But when you're in opposition at Holyrood, why fight Westminster? You fight the SNP. Because they'll be fighting Westminster, and if you fight Westminster, you are just making the SNP's point for them.
The SNP haven't always been in power at Holyrood.
No, but I'm saying it changes once you get into power. Where your enemy lies changes.
Right, so again, if these powers are removed, just run that past me again. The powers are going to be removed. The SNP aren't going to notice.
No, the SNP have noticed. Mike Russell's been banging on about it for 18 months.
And you think
nobody's been told about it.
You think there's no plans in place when this internal market thing finally comes in, that they've actually got ways to disrupt it?
Tomorrow, well, they've already walked out. They no longer discuss it with the Westminster government, because the Westminster government...
That was a year ago.
Yeah. That's how long it's been on the go. The Westminster government will not compromise on what they want.
So you think the SNP are just going to go on their holidays if they take these powers away?
There's nothing they can do, Stuart. They can scream and shout about it and jump up and down.
See, I disagree with you. Nothing you can do. I mean, like I say, these laws can be struck down by the courts.
We talk about a power grab, which is probably the wrong way to describe this. This is powers that the EU had that are not being returned to...
That's not 100% true, Nori.
Okay, right.
They don't yet have a committee of unelected officials with the power to strike down Scottish legislation they don't like, which is now been added to the plan.
No, that's the law they're trying to pass. That's what they want. Well, what they will pass. They've got an 80-seat majority.
What's the difference from what I just said?
That's what they're going to do.
That's what
They've already got the Henry VIII laws. Yes, I know that's what you said. I'm agreeing with you. That's what we're discussing, what they're going to do. But part of that, sure, which is a part nobody seems to have noticed, is not only will they have an oversight from a committee that's unelected about Scottish laws that are passed to make sure that they're in line with English laws and trade agreements. Mm-hmm. Individual Westminster ministers are going to be able to override the Scottish government. in discussion with the Scottish government, but if the Scottish government doesn't agree with them, they can do what they want.
What's the difference?
Well, the point is, one man, one possibly English minister will be able to turn around to Holyrood and say, no, you can't do that because we want to do this.
Right, well, what's the
I think they'll
difference
give
between...
themselves the power to come up and shag our daughters again as well.
Did they ever lose that power?
And do you think Dominic Cummings, he's going to appoint this committee? They're going to be officials that he wants on this committee. And the ministers that they've got there are the same. They only become ministers. What's the difference?
Sorry, I have no idea what you're trying to say. You're saying Dominic Cummings is going to dictate to the ministers what he wants Scotland to do.
What's the difference between a minister and an appointed official deciding that Scotland, any law that's passed in Holyrood can be struck down? What's the difference?
Well, the ministers would obviously make a political decision. Then you're probably going to get the officials would most likely make a decision on the legalities of it. Presumably, they're looking to appoint people to this committee that are actually a bit better qualified than politicians.
Both the officials and the ministers are effectively will be answerable to Dominic Cummings. Either way.
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with that either. What I'm talking about is this is even worse than a committee of unelected people. This is a minister who may well have a reason in his own constituency not allowing the Scottish government to pass a law. And he can turn around and say, you can't do that.
Anyway, we've hopefully got a lot of, we're not even halfway through the game at the moment. We've got a lot of time to go before that happens, before the first law is struck down.
Well, we've stirred up a lot of shite for people to argue about, that's for sure.
Well, it's very scary. And it not only, of course, applies to us. It applies to the Welsh and it applies to Stormont.
No, it doesn't quite apply to Stormont because they really don't want to upset the apple cart there at the moment. That's what was one issue.
Sorry,
let's be clear. What they're trying to bring in here is effectively the direct rule that they were just operating Stormont by the last 2.5 years.
Well, actually, Stuart's made a really good point there because I'm wrong.
No, they are right.
It doesn't apply to Stormont because of the EU agreement. So when they get up and say they cannot afford to differentiate between different parts of the UK,
they're talking horseshit.
They've already done it in Northern Ireland, which is, I think that was the only lever I could see for the Scottish government to use was, look, you've already said Northern Ireland's different, you can say Scotland's different. But we know how well that worked the last time it was used.
Oh, that doesn't go down well in England.
Not at all.
I mean, Northern Ireland's a burden. Scotland's is a treasure chest.
Yep. And I am beginning to think, can you get civil UDI?
No, but there's probably some weird kind of same-sex UDI that sounds exactly the same, mate, but it's got a different label on it.
Civil UDI.
Well, that was heated and interesting, chaps.
Aye, and that's three bawbags that didn't really care much about the law, just have been having a wee bone up in it for about 5 minutes.
Let's throw a wee bone into this discussion. Presumably we're getting to an end. We've been on for over an hour. Apparently the British government's economic plans are in ruins, and the economy was expected to rebound, well, the economists expected the economy to rebound by 5.5%, and it only came up by 1.8%. So they're already in trouble on the economy.
How's Sturgeon to blame for that? I'm asking for an Express headline writer.
No, yeah, you're just asking for a friend, aren't you? You just don't want to name them.
Oh, God. Well, Jimmy's point about this lot being crap, I think all they can do is destroy stuff, grind the bones of the working class into gold dust for their buddies.
You've genuinely got to wonder if there's a superhero that could save the Tory party of England, because they've hollowed it out that much that seriously, people like Michael Govan that are looking like fucking intellectual heavyweights. You know what I mean? The man's never had an original idea in his life. Rupert Murdoch phones his missus and tells him what pair of pants to put on in the morning.
It is actually amazing when you look at the Tories that they lost at the last election, the ones that Boris fired, basically, and you look at the quality of the intellect amongst them, and I'm talking about Tories here. It is really scary that this lot that are in power now got there.
Aye.
It's very strange. If
When
it
do we
wasn't
get
for
rid?
Donald Trump, we would have the stupidest premier of any country in the world.
Aye.
But that's not fair. No, that isn't fair. There's Turkey and Poland and yeah, sorry, I didn't mean that. I take that back.
No, but Turkey and Poland didn't get the opportunity to replace him 3 times in the space of 4 years, and we just kept giving the Tories more power.
Look, I want to know how they managed to silence Nigel Farage for so long. Not even on telly anymore.
Does he not spend his days on a boat in the middle of the channel throwing rocks at rubber dinghies?
It's not his style. He just does that to get publicity, and it's not working.
He's done his job.
Does he stand on the White Cliffs of Dover with a telescope and a walkie-talkie?
Basically, he's got a big bag of cash to play with now because he's done the job that Steve Bannon needed him to do. He's got Brexit through. He's destabilised Western Europe. He's destabilised Britain.
Yeah, well, he's also destabilising the planet, according to, I think I mentioned it the other day, is to destabilise New Zealand.
Doesn't matter how much money they throw at it. Jacinta Ardern is not going to lose an election. Doesn't matter how much money the right wing throw at it.
If she does, that's totally unbelievable.
It's a deputy that's up against her.
She's going to have to be caught on telly fingering lambs or something ridiculous like that for the New Zealanders to turn against her.
Oh no, that's a horrible thought.
No, exactly. How do you
I'm
get
sorry,
the public to turn against somebody like that?
I have a confession. I've had my hand up a food's ass.
Hold it. Aye.
It's a border thing. Okay, guys. On that pretty mental picture, we'll call it a day. Thanks, Jimmy Hutton. Thanks, Stuart Lockhead.
Yes.
I'm Norrie Stewart, and we'll catch you tomorrow. PMQs to look forward to, boys.
Woohoo!
Bye-bye.
Cheers for now, listeners and watchers.